What do you think is the number one reason why Israeli leaders, from Prime Minister Netanyahu, to be fair, all the way through the system, military, intelligence, diplomatic, arguably, how did everybody miss what was coming?
Well, I think you said it correctly. This is a colossal failure. It's a failure that doesn't just rest in the military, doesn't just rest in the top command of our intelligence agencies. It goes from the top of our government down to the soldier who was standing guard that morning on the fence and on the barrier with Gaza. Everyone was believing in something of a fairy tale, that Hamas wanted economic prosperity, that Hamas could be contained, that technology and money could buy us quiet and we could kick the can down the road, and that this would work over a period of decades. This wasn't something that just popped into someone's mind one day a couple of years ago. This was incubated and it cultivated over a period of years. So what the book does is it goes obviously into the 36 hours preceding the 6:29 a.m. attack on October 7th, when the rockets started to be launched into Israel.
Yeah, and I have to say that one of the things I loved about this book was the original reporting that you guys did. I wasn't sure if you were going to go in just, in more of an analytical approach, which you also do, but you guys really paint the picture, what we would say in journalism, the tick-tock, sort of the moment by moment of how this thing really played out, and who was calling whom, who was talking to whom, who got up early thinking maybe something's coming, but I'm not sure, whom should I tell?
So we go through the blow by blow, exactly, that tick-tock moment of what was happening at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., up until the attack actually commences, and then in the immediate aftermath. But then what we do is, and we thought this was most important, go back in time. Mm-hmm. Go to when Hamas was conceived, when Hamas was created in the 1980s in Gaza. And I went, and Amir and I went, and we met with the officers, the Israeli military officials who were on the ground in Gaza at the time, who were meeting with Sheikh Yassin, Ismail Haniyeh, Muhammad Def, all the top leaders of Hamas, many of them who were killed by Israel over the last 2 years of this war. So it was important to look at when Hamas came into being, into existence, what were the warning signs that we saw then, and how did we get to this point that we believed that a genocidal jihadist terrorist organization could be bought off with money?
Let's start with the fact, that the Israeli government at the moment, the Netanyahu government, is resisting the formation of a state commission of inquiry, when that's what we were told for 2 years. Look, we can't have this until the war is over. Right. And the war is effectively over. I'm not saying there's not more to do. There is. But so what's your assessment of why we're not moving quickly to get a formal, the Israeli version of the 9/11 Commission?
Well, look at something very simple that's happened. If you look at the military, the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, you look at the Shin Bet, that's the Security Intelligence Agency.
The FBI of Israel,
exactly, but responsible for gathering intelligence on Gaza. They have both been purged. Anyone who basically was involved in operations in the run-up to October 7th, or involved on the ground in operations on October 7th, they're no longer in uniform. They're no longer in the Shin Bet.
When you say purge, but many of them resigned voluntarily.
Many of them took responsibility.
At least at the higher levels.
Correct, but
right?
but
people were fired.
Some people were fired. Some people were pushed out. Some people willingly, on their own, decided to take responsibility and to walk away from their jobs. That's only happened, though, in the military and in the Shin Bet. In the political echelon, in the government, there's no one who has taken responsibility and said, I am accountable, and as a result, I will step down. Now, we need a commission of inquiry, in my opinion. This book is great. I think
everybody
so.
at the top has said we were going to get one.
But we need one because we have to learn the lessons so that this won't happen again.
Right.
This is important. This happened to us in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War, when we were surprised by Egypt and Syria in October of 73, almost 50 years to the day of October 7th. It happened now. We have to ensure this doesn't happen again. Why the government doesn't want it? Because I think they know what it will discover. And they know, and Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically knows, that, look, Joel, he was the prime minister for about 15 years consecutively up until October 7th.
It's hard to say this didn't happen truly on his watch.
Policies were set by him.
Now, he's done an amazing, I think, an astonishingly good job as a wartime leader, assassinating all of the top leadership of both Hezbollah and Hamas, taking out the Iran nuclear program. So there's a lot of wins as he heads into, I just want to put the context is, we're heading towards elections in 2026. Legally, they can't happen later than October. They might happen sooner, but any way you slice it, we're heading into the third anniversary of October 7th with an election that may be a referendum
correct,
on where the catastrophic failures of October 7th, so much that group needs to be washed out to sea, or did they redeem themselves by how much they got done over the next 2 years, or is that the wrong question even to ask?
First of all, I totally agree with everything you just said. I think that what Netanyahu has done over the last 2 years is remarkable, biblical, unbelievable in re-engineering the situation here in the Middle East, from Iran to Syria to Lebanon and to Gaza itself. But two, you can have two truths at once. One, he deserves the credit for this change. Two, he deserves the blame for this colossal failure the day that the most Jews were murdered on a single day since the Holocaust was October 7th.
Israel and Iran have stopped their missile war, but a spiritual battle is still taking place. Today, nearly 99% of Israelis don't yet know Jesus. Think about that. Nearly 99% of Israelis don't yet know Jesus, but a miracle is unfolding. One for Israel is a ministry that shares the gospel, and I can tell you, Jewish people are starting to accept Jesus in numbers not seen since the early church. Many Arabs are also finding faith and unity. One for Israel is an initiative of native-born Israelis sharing the gospel, discipling believers, and equipping spiritual leaders across Israel. As Romans 10:1 expresses, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. Your support helps bring the gospel back to Israel. I want you to do something right now. Pick up the phone and call 800-892-9065. That's 800-892-9065 to help share the gospel in Israel. Visit oneforisrael.org/partner or scan the QR code. You go through a lot of reasons. I mean, you guys, you and your colleague Amir Abobat really do such tremendous reporting. I really thought this book was excellent, and that's why we're recommending it as a must-read. So there's several things, but you talk about the thing which may be the most important, which was the concept that somehow the entire Israeli political and military intelligence security establishment had decided that Hamas was not a threat. Let's keep our eyes on Iran, Hezbollah, other these type of issues. And there was a concept, and every piece of intelligence that didn't seem to fit that was sort of not paid attention to. It was almost, I mean, there's psychological terms for this, people. But how would you describe in layman's terms the concept that the Israeli security establishment was running on?
Well, in Hebrew we call it the conceptia, but exactly, it's the concept. And excuse me, the idea being that you have a belief system. And the belief system is that Hamas does not want war. Hamas wants economic prosperity. It wants to continue to get the Qatari money. Remember, $30 million in cash were going into Gaza every month for poor Palestinians. They were going to Hamas, enlarging Hamas's budget. Israel was allowing
and that was largely accepted by or affirmed by the Netanyahu government over the years. There were two
it was requested by Israel.
Outliers, I guess. Avigdor Lieberman at one point when he was the defense minister, and Naftali Bennett pushed back at a while, but not enough to stop Qatar from shipping this money literally in suitcases and trunks.
And it was believed to be working. And then the second was that they wanted their people in Gaza to come into Israel and to work inside the kibbutzim and inside the factories, inside the towns. They had about 20,000 people. For 20,000 people getting an Israeli salary, that was sustaining hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza.
Because the salary in Israel was so much
higher than there.
In Gaza.
Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was explaining to Israelis, was telling the mediators, the Qataris, the Egyptians, I don't want war. I want quiet. You remember, Joel, that there was an operation just about a year before October 7th, in the summer of 2022. It was just about 48 hours. Israel took out just Islamic Jihad guys, and Hamas stood on the sidelines. They didn't get involved. Israel saw that and said, one second, Hamas really doesn't want war. So altogether, it created this prism. And this concept, this prism, is that Hamas is deterred. It doesn't want war.
Hamas, so it wasn't just that Israelis were coming up with their own assessment. Hamas was building a
narrative,
false narrative
exactly.
to lower the suspicion, lower the guard of the Israeli
This
leadership.
was deception at its best. And it lowered the guard. And it got Israel to believe that there was no chance of war. And that's why, even in the months ahead of October 7th, There were reports. There were the female soldiers who were stationed along the border, the surveillance
watching
soldiers.
all this stuff.
Watching things, watching the border.
Their reports weren't listened to.
They were seeing senior Hamas commanders coming closer to the border. They were seeing training along the border. There was a non-commissioned officer in the Gaza division, intelligence officer, who wrote a report called the Jericho Walls, Joel. It's for the biblical Jericho walls that came tumbling down back in the time of Joshua. And her report basically warned Hamas is preparing to breach this very sophisticated border. But it was all ignored because it didn't fit the concept.
The term in sort of psychological parlance is confirmation bias. You're basically, unless a piece of data fits what you think is going to happen anyway, you ignore it. You don't say, oh, that doesn't fit. I should focus on that and say, what is that telling me? And we sort of, and we all do it. We all do it in our marriages. We do it with our children. We do it in our workplaces. But when you're working at the highest levels of keeping the Israeli people secure and the Zionist enterprise alive, which is never again, we'll never allow. I mean, there'll be a war here and there. We'll win it. We're not going to just allow women and children and Holocaust survivors to be slaughtered, raped, burned alive in their homes while they sleep on a Sabbath morning in the Jewish state of Israel. I mean, that's bad.
No, and especially that confirmation bias that you talk about. In an intelligence agency, you are meant to have safeguards and have systems in place that constantly are countering and questioning and second guessing this. But here's the other piece of it. We have soldiers along the border. We believe,
we know many that morning.
Right, but we know that Hamas is a genocidal group.
Right,
We've been fighting with them a war every 2 years. This is no news to Israel.
Right.
Why didn't we raise the level of alert?
So why?
Well, there are different answers, but one of them is that, and it sounds crazy today, Joel, but the answer was at the time, they were afraid, the Israeli military commanders, that if we raise the level of alert, and Hamas sees that we're raising the level of alert, they will think that we're attacking, even if they weren't planning to attack, and then they will attack. So the whole question of, is Hamas planning a drill? Is Hamas planning an attack? This debate that was going on throughout the night was because there were signs, there were signals that were going off that were showing that Hamas was preparing something, but they just couldn't put their finger. You know what it was? We had the information. We lacked the imagination.
Yeah. Well, that is the central line from the 9/11 Commission report. It wasn't a lack of intelligence; it was a lack of imagination to put these things together. There was a couple other things related to this. One was you discovered, I had never seen it reported anywhere else, that there were a bunch of Israeli cell phones, mobile phones, that SIM cards started to get loaded in, and the Israeli intelligence was starting to pick up all these phones sort of lighting up in the 24 hours or so before. That had happened before, and nothing had happened. So that was another piece of, well, are they getting ready for something or not?
So yeah, you had three primary signs. One was on Friday, so about 24 hours before, suddenly about 100 cell phones go live in Gaza with Israeli SIM cards. So it means one of two things. Either you suddenly have 100 Israelis in Gaza, that's not a good thing, or you have 100 Palestinians in Gaza who have switched their SIM cards and are planning to come into Israel, and they want to be able to continue to communicate, which means maybe there's an infiltration on its way. Right. But then when they looked back, they saw that a year prior, they had also tested a smaller number, about 30, 40, but nothing happened. Maybe this is the annual oil checkup of the SIM cards in Gaza. That was piece one. Piece two was during the night. Suddenly we start to detect them uncovering underground rocket launchers, seemingly getting ready to launch rockets. That's where the drill comes into play. So the SIM cards last year, this year, probably a drill. This is also part of a drill. The Israeli intelligence intercepts a phone call between an Islamic Jihad operative, another terrorist group, and a senior Hamas operative. The Islamic Jihad operative says, what are you guys doing uncovering these rocket launchers? And he says, don't worry about it. It's a drill. That further deception and deceives Israel into believing this actually is a drill. Then we start to see them preparing underground bunkers for people like Muhammad Def, the elusive, deadly, terrible mastermind of this attack, the senior Hamas military commander. He ends up getting killed in an Israeli airstrike, but they're preparing the underground bunker, tunnel network for him and his family. Like we said, there was a lot of different alarm bells that were going off, and for that reason, even the IDF chief of staff at the time, Herzi Halevi, is home, is getting these phone calls, is getting some of these reports, goes into his study, because he doesn't like to take the calls from his bed, goes into his study and writes a note to himself. Don't just dismiss this as if it's nothing. But tragically, they dismissed it. And when 6:29 a.m., when the clock struck that time, the thousands of rockets began getting launched into Israel, and Hamas raided the border and raided those frontline IDF positions and the kibbutzim.
Okay, at least one other major element of at least Netanyahu and his team's inability, perhaps, to see what was coming was, I think, was the fact that Netanyahu believed he and his team were changing the Middle East. He had successfully, with President Trump, brokered 4 historic Arab-Israeli peace agreements, what became known as the Abraham Accords. And Netanyahu truly was, within weeks, maybe a month or two, of finishing a deal with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. A Saudi-Israeli peace normalization agreement would have been absolutely game-changing and would have opened the door for many other countries, Indonesia and many other.
And you're one of the
Muslim
few Israeli citizens who actually sat with MBS, met him, and had conversations, which is remarkable in of itself.
Which is why I believed all the data that I was seeing that this was inbound, that I believed that MBS wanted it. He was looking for the right moment, and given that the Abraham Accords had been going well with the other countries, that the moment seemed ripe. Now, talking to Saudi officials at a senior level later, they now say they feel like they inadvertently played a role in triggering October 7th, because when the Crown Prince sat down with Bret Baier of Fox News and said, effectively, we're that close, that was a signal to Iran. If we're going, we better send Hamas and Hezbollah into motion. All that to say, Netanyahu thought he was dealing with a new Middle East, and that in management terms, you and I talked about this on the Joshua Fund podcast. There's, people say there are problems to solve, and then there are tensions to be managed. Netanyahu never saw Hamas as a problem to solve. He believed it was a tension that you could manage and manage effectively while you had bigger fish to fry. We're dealing with Iran,
Correct.
We're dealing with Hezbollah, and we might make peace with the Saudis. So let's not do
Rock
anything that would provoke
Exactly.
a conflict to our south. How did that fit in your reporting?
100% that we had bigger fish to fry. And Netanyahu, he himself even writes this in his autobiography. I was focused on Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas. We could deal with, we had it under control. We did not, and we paid the price for that.
The memoirs came out before
Correct.
October 7th.
I think the year before.
But he does say.
But he does give insight into that type of thinking. The Saudi normalization, which we were close, as you say, and I was hearing this from the Biden officials at the time and from the Israeli officials. There's no doubt, and according to Israeli intelligence, that this was one of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas's ambitions. Torpedo this, prevent this from happening.
Blow up this
Potential accord, don't let it happen. And look, so far, he has succeeded. We just saw the visit a few weeks ago of MBS to Washington, talks of arms sales, talks of civilian nuclear energy. Not yet, at least at that meeting, talk of normalization with Israel. So there's a lot going on, but we're still not where we wanted to be. But I think that Hamas had other ambitions here as well. And this was, let us bring the Palestinian issue back to the forefront of the world's agenda. Look at how they got recognition of a Palestinian state from France, Britain, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Spain, and others. Turn the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian issue into the rallying cry of all youth around the world. And Joel, we've spoken about what's going on in the college campuses and all over the world. Any city you go to today, free Gaza, from the river to the sea, the palace. I mean, this is what they have succeeded in doing. And therefore, and Israel at the same time, isolated on the international stage. So if you're Sinwar, God forbid, but if Sinwar comes back, he looks out at the world today, I'm not sure that he says to himself that this was a failure.
Why, with all that planning by Hamas, why didn't Hezbollah move at the exact same moment? Wasn't that the Iranian plan? And from their perspective, what went wrong for them?
Well, this is an important question, because what Hamas wanted to do together with Iran and Hezbollah was launch a coordinated assault. And I mean, Joel, if that had happened on that Saturday morning, Hezbollah coming across the north, Iran raining down its long-range ballistic missiles on Israel, and Hamas coming from the south, I shudder at the thought, at what that would have meant for the state of
Hezbollah had
Israel.
a 10-year plan. They
Correct.
were trained, they were armed. I went and saw the 18,000 weapons up on an IDF base up north and saw the plans. That would have been a terrifying, how come it didn't happen?
Because Hamas jumped the gun. This was supposed to be coordinated. Sinwar, it apparently got to his head. He wanted to take the glory. He wanted to be the first. He went first. And by October 8th, when Hezbollah sees the next day already, or the few hours immediately this is happening, Israel, one of the most brilliant things it did in that moment was send tens of thousands of reservists to the northern border. So Hezbollah now sees this amassing of soldiers on the Israeli side. Their idea of a ground invasion is not going to work anymore. So they start with the rockets. That starts October 8th, and that leads us into the war that we, to some extent, is still ongoing between Israel and Hezbollah.
Israel just taking out the other day the second highest military chief
Correct.
within the Hezbollah. Look, I, as an evangelical, think it was a miracle that, as bad as October 7th was, and it was horrifying, and I'm still processing it theologically and personally as an Israeli, and all the people we've met and interviewed, but I think it is a miracle of God, the protection of God, that he didn't allow Hezbollah to move the same way. You're a religious Jew. I don't know if you see it in theological terms, you would call it a miracle, but by the grace of God, we I don't know if you could say we would have lost the country, but I've talked to very senior people who think we would have. I don't know how we would have won this war.
I don't know either, and this is without a doubt the silver lining of what happened on October 7th. This wake-up call that it happened with Hamas, and as terrible as it was, 1,200 people massacred, 251 taken hostage, Israel dragged into a war that to some extent still continues today, that it didn't happen from the bigger enemy that we were facing in the north, we could look at it as divine intervention.
Amen. Yaakov, thank you so much. Thank you for the book. This is the book you need to read in December. Ali Sharabi's book, Hostage, was the book you needed to read in November. Even if you get this book and give it as a gift, which I would encourage you, and you're like, I don't really want my Hanukkah Christmas reading to be about how Israel missed this. Okay, fair enough. Get the book anyway, give it as a gift, and read it in January when things are a little quieter. And because we as evangelicals who love Israel and are praying for Israel and its protection, we need to understand what happened, why it happened, and how to make sure it never happens again.